Welcome to the Momentum Flow podcast, where ideas, innovations, and experiences are shared to create a continuous stream of inspiration and insight. Join me, your host, Luis Solana, a supply chain expert and investor, as I uncover how visionary founders, operators, and leaders are spotting opportunities, sparking innovation, and scaling profitable growth. From plan to cash, I bring real-world experience and an investor's eye to reveal how clarity, capital, and conviction fuel sustainable growth. Tune in and let's keep the momentum flow going. So welcome to the Momentum Flow, where ideas, innovations, and experiences create a continuous stream of inspiration and insight. I'm Luis Solana, a supply chain operator turned investor, and on this Veterans Day, we're honoring leaders who understand both the discipline of service and the complexity of global operations. My guest today, Bob Stewart, brings over 40 years of experience in supply chain leadership. He previously led supply chain operations for McDonald's, one of the most dynamic and far-reaching food networks in the world, and also served 15 years in the U.S. Navy Reserve. Bob's story reflects something I've seen throughout my own journey, that the clarity, discipline, and teamwork that define great operators also define great investors. In this episode, we'll explore how military service builds the mindset for transformation, how supply chain leadership drives innovation at scale, and why forward-thinking corporations are widening their innovation funnels to tap into the breakthrough technologies being incubated today. From plan to cash, we'll uncover how the future of supply chain is being rewritten by three global megatrends: automation and digitization, visibility and global trade, and resilience and productivity. So let's dive in and keep the momentum flow going. Once again, welcome to the Momentum Flow and happy Veterans Day to everyone listening. I'm joined today by Bob Stewart, former North America's Chief Supply Chain Officer of McDonald's and U.S. Navy Reserve veteran. Bob, thanks for joining me today. Before we get into the details, thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. Before we get into the details, take a moment to introduce yourself, your Navy background, your path into McDonald's, and then elaborate on how and what that journey taught you about leadership and operations at scale.
Yeah, thank you, Luis. It's great to be here with you. Congratulations to you on your inaugural podcast here, and I'm sure you'll have many future success podcasts that will really help to elevate supply chain and continue that momentum, as you said. So really appreciate it. Honored to be here. Particularly honored to be here on Veterans Day. My family has a long history of military service. My dad served in World War II and spent 10 years in the U.S. Army, and always felt that was an important part and foundational for anybody to serve their country for a bit. So my journey was a little bit different. I ended up attending the State University of New York Maritime College, and I started there. And that school focuses on training sailors essentially to either apply their learning and education to go into the merchant marine, to sail on commercial vessels, container ships, tankers, etc., either on the engineering or the deck side, navigation side, or to apply their learning to go into the service, whether it's Coast Guard, whether it's Navy, Marines, Army, etc. So that was what the training was intended to do. I had a great experience there, combination of education, practical training on the training ship, as well as regimental experience as well. All three of those factors were encouraged during the time that I was there. What I chose to do while I considered going active duty into the Navy, I had a passion to learn the commercial side of the merchant marine. So I spent 3 years at sea on container vessels as an officer at sea, and basically in the South America trade, Caribbean South America trade, for just about 3 years. Really built a foundation there, building on my learnings from the academy, but also learning a lot of practical knowledge at sea from veterans who had been out to sea for quite some time. During that time, I maintained my active reservist status in the Navy Reserve. I entered into the Navy Reserve as an ensign, and I maintained that for 15 years, ultimately leaving the Naval Reserve as a lieutenant 15 years later in my career. But I maintained that, and I have so much deep respect from the weekend active duties that I did. Never served active duty full time, but did some weekend stints, and that was a great opportunity to see the value that the military brings to the world, frankly, and to the United States. That eventually took me into the maritime industry, where I worked in several container ships and worked on the container ship, but then came on the commercial side into sales and operations, and ultimately landed at McDonald's over 30 years ago. And at McDonald's, I was brought on to leverage that knowledge of the industry, the maritime industry, as McDonald's was growing globally and expanding in a variety of countries. They wanted to develop a strategy for their global ocean freight, which is the experience and knowledge that I had. So that's how I came to McDonald's. 31 years later, I held a variety of roles and then retired at the end of last year as Chief Supply Chain Officer for North America. And it was a great opportunity to leverage some of that background, but also learn some new skills. And there's so many transferable skills from the military experience into the commercial side and industry today. Well, I know we'll talk more about that, but I feel that the training both at the academy and at sea were very practical and, very transferable to both understanding the operations at a company like McDonald's, but also, on the supply chain side as well.
So just following up on that, so obviously you've operated in two highly complex environments, right? The US Navy and McDonald's global supply chain. So what parallels do you see between mission readiness in the Navy and operational readiness in the supply chain?
Yeah, I love that question, by the way. Thank you for that one. I think there are so many parallels when I think about my time both in industry and my time at sea in the merchant marine. One of them is in a complex environment, and the mission is slightly different. The mission at McDonald's is serving 50 million customers a day globally, 50 million plus. The mission at sea is about readiness. It's about ensuring you're prepared for whatever that next event is. For the military, it could be a high state of readiness based on something that's going on geopolitically around the world. In the merchant marine, it could be something about a weather system. It could be about cargo status. It could be about the integrity of the vessel and working together. So I think if I look at each one of those, what has been very consistent is resiliency and agility and planning and making sure that you're making plans for every potential scenario that could come your way. And in the system, the industry, the factors that can come at your way, there's so many, right? Whether it's geopolitical risk, trade risk, whether it's something like COVID that we all faced back a few years ago. There's so many factors that you need to be prepared for, but you need to prepare for those contingencies and train on those contingencies. What you do at sea. At sea, we had a weekly lifeboat drill to make sure we knew in an abandoned ship situation, God forbid that would happen, we were ready. Everybody knew their role. You trust your shipmates. You had 12 to 15 shipmates that you're working with, and you have to know your role. And that's just critical to survival. In industry, whether it's McDonald's, any other company, you have to prepare for cyber situations that could come your way, trade disruptions, and the contingency planning around those, as well as validating that the contingency plans that you have are working and will work is so critical. So I think that planning piece is very, very important. Building solid contingencies, but also being agile enough to adjust, because you can have the best strategy in the world and the best plans, but we all know that things come off out of left field on occasion. You have to be ready for that. And the military, I think, trains you very well to at least contemplate how to handle those when they come at you.
So let's talk about that, about your service, because that transition in the corporate world isn't always that straightforward, right? So what habits or mindsets from your service years really carried over most naturally into your leadership position at McDonald's and others?
Well, I think there's a few obvious ones when you think of the service. Discipline is one that, comes up often. And I always say that, there's a good side of discipline and a not so good side of discipline because discipline implies that you don't have the agility to respond
Mhm.
to a variety of things that may be coming at you. But I would say discipline is important to stay with the plan, understand your roles, but also, I think what prepared me most was personal accountability and making sure I knew my role. And that's important in the corporate world as well. What is your role? What is your responsibility? How do you continuously learn? So that's one thing. Discipline, personal accountability, time management. There's a reality. Whether you're in the military, I always enjoyed the university because maritime college, because we had three things that we had to focus on: the regiment, education, if you were on a sport, but also the ship itself and maintaining the integrity of the ship. So all those things were happening all the time. So it's very complex, and that's very consistent with the industry and the working world that we all live in. There's a lot of complexity, a lot of moving parts. So really very important that you have a planned approach to manage through that, and you manage your time wisely and prioritize where you should be spending your time and what are the areas that you just don't have the time to focus on in the time of crisis or just going through your average day, because there are so many things that you can work on. So those were the main things that I think were most transferable immediately. And then working as a team is critical. And you learn that early in the military, whether it's military college or merchant marine, you have to rely on your shipmates. And that's the same when you get to the industry and you're working for a large, complex company. You have to rely on the plant managers, you have to rely on the logistics professionals, you have to rely on each other and trust and build that
Mhm.
trust and relationship to get the mission accomplished. And there's a lot of parallels there.
I love that discipline, accountability, and trust. I think I can see that very clearly. Thanks for sharing that. Now, veterans bring extraordinary planning and execution skills as well, right? And you mentioned that earlier in the conversation. However, many companies don't always know how to translate that into business terms, right? How to translate that rigor into true business operation terms. So, how can organizations better recognize and integrate veteran talent into their supply chain ecosystems?
Yes, great opportunity. I've seen that at a few of the organizations that I worked with is just having the organization understand the real value that veterans can bring. So a couple ways to do that is you want to make that transition for the veteran into the industry as smooth as possible. And despite that they're coming from a command and control environment, very hierarchical. Companies are often not that hierarchical. Maybe they have a matrix organization. So how do you help them understand how to work within a new framework? And the ways to do that, when I was with McDonald's did a nice job with that by having a veterans business network. So a way for veterans to get together and to share their experiences, but also a way for veterans to engage with non-veterans, share their experiences, but learn from those in the organization that perhaps have some ideas on how to get them involved into the business. So you do that through either mentorship circles, those types of things that really get the veterans fully engaged into the organization. And I have some thoughts on, how veterans can better, articulate the value they bring as well. And we can talk about that a little bit later. But I think those are the main things that organizations can do. They can also showcase and highlight the value veterans bring to the entire organization. So that's something that we also did at McDonald's, and we had a veterans to watch on our website. So these are veterans that are moving up within the organization, a little bit of their background, their service background, what they're doing within the organization to provide a spotlight on them and create discussion and dialogue.
That's excellent. Thanks for sharing. Let me dig a little deeper into the McDonald's supply chain because I know my audience will enjoy a little bit going deeper into that. So, running a fast food global supply chain, it means managing everything, right, from farms to front counters across the globe. What guiding principles help you sustain that balance between wanting efficiency, leverage the scale, and live to the brand trust expectations from McDonald's?
Yes, another great question. And I think that's the conundrum that many companies face is managing your global scale to be efficient, but yet how do you maintain relevance from a brand perspective? So I would say that, when you look specifically within most organizations, and McDonald's was consistent here, you should always focus on the customer. And a guiding principle is the customer and the customer need state. And if you look at the customer, the customer expectations and what they need changes over time. And if you don't stay current with that, you'll find yourself with a brand that is no longer relevant to the customer. So a guiding principle is stay close to the customer and have everyone within the organization, the entire enterprise relentlessly focused on the customer. And if you do that, and that was a guiding principle from Ray Kroc way back when he founded McDonald's, is focus on the customer. So that would be one principle. Two is stay very consistent with your core and the core that you provide and know what customers love about your brand. So, for McDonald's, it's your what you would expect, your hamburgers, your Big Mac, your quarter pounder, your nuggets, your fries, and consistent application of delivery from a quality and safety perspective around the world is so important. And McDonald's does a wonderful job of that.
Mm,
Balancing scale. I think the other foundational piece that's very important is taking what you call a system first approach. So what's best for the system when you're making decisions? And I'll give an example of that. If from a supply chain perspective, if you're looking at sourcing a particular raw material in a country and having a processing facility in that country, it may not make sense to have a processing facility in every country that you operate from an efficiency and scale. Although that market would probably like that, or that region would like that to have somebody in their market, less issues across the border, etc. But I may not be efficient. What's best for the system? So the best system solution is probably not to have a different facility in every market. So making sure that the system and the enterprise, whatever enterprise you operate in, has that as a grounding foundation principle that everybody's aligned with, I think is so important wherever you operate. What are you all agreeing on? What's most important, customer and the system?
that makes all sense to me. So, obviously, you've operated end to end, right? Planning, sourcing, making, deliver,
Yeah.
collect. So, it's complex to operate a really large and multi-dimensional supply chain. So you normally need some piece of technology. So from the technology perspective, where do you see the biggest bang for the buck, the biggest drive for value in the entire value chain today in regards to technology investments?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think of two answers to that. I think on the overall side of it, companies will see that anything that's consumer facing from a technology perspective will deliver a return on that investment. And so today's consumer, they shop, they spend, and they order on their iPhone or whatever their cell phone is. So the interaction with the consumer has to be digital through some ways that's efficient and consistent with what else is out there in the marketplace and how they're used to engaging. So that is number one. And from any company perspective, how do you engage a customer? From a supply chain perspective, I think that's another thing. That's really about how do you automate, how do you provide more greater visibility to supply chain information, inventory across the supply chain. And I always like to say, how do you democratize that data? How do you create that visibility across all entities that operate with your supply chain so they have visibility so they can plan and operate more effectively and make the right decisions so that they're not manufacturing more product when we have product in a warehouse, 10 miles away.
Yeah.
That type of thing. So that visibility, I think, is critical to any organization.
Excellent. No, you and I can spend hours talking about supply chain, right? But I would like to just move us to a different part of the conversation, which is as valuable, which is the leadership and culture and talent side, right? So, from both your military and corporate experience, so which are those leadership principles that you carried consistent throughout your career?
Yeah, I think the foundational ones that I spoke about are very very relevant. But for me personally, what's always been important is authenticity and a degree of transparency as to expectations from me as a leader. I never wanted my team, wherever I was, to be surprised. And staying somewhat consistent, appropriately consistent as a leader so that they knew where I was coming from had the same intentions as our mission and wanted everybody to succeed and excel. So whether that's in setting expectations and sharing those expectations, understanding what their challenges were, and then being there to help the team break down barriers. Because as a leader, ultimately, when it comes down to what your role as a leader is understanding your team and how do you position them to excel and exceed and grow and exceed expectations and grow. And what can you do to enable that? So one, authenticity, transparency would be two, and also acting with a high degree of integrity and having that to be visible with the team. So the decisions that you make sure that the team and the system knows why you made those decisions, and don't be afraid to share why you made those decisions. Folks may not agree, but you develop a high degree of integrity when you share that. And that was I learned that very much early on in the Maritime Academy as well. And that integrity that's your personal brand right there. So
No,
that's
absolutely.
critical.
I love how you think about authenticity, transparency. Those are paramount skills, and I applaud your approach there. Really, from the let me try to connect this then to the early conversation, right? Going back to celebrating Veterans Day, right? So, for veterans considering careers in supply chain, what advice would you offer, especially for translating their logistics, their coordination, their rigor, their leadership skills into business success? But also, give me the other side, right? For corporate leaders, how can they really better attract, mentor, retain those veterans as part of their operations and innovation strategies, right? Because it's a two-way conversation. So
Absolutely.
how do ones make themselves relevant and transfer the skills into the business, and how do the companies embrace them and take the best make it a great destination for them to work at?
Yeah, I love that question. I'm going to start with the second piece first, and that's on the corporation. In addition to what we spoke about just a minute ago on the mentorship circles and those types of things, I think it's also important for large, complex organizations that they have individuals within their talent teams and recruiting teams that understand the value of that veterans can bring to the organization, particularly when uh, there's a large group of veterans that are looking for the next phase of their life and their career. What do they do? If I remember the number correctly, the average veteran officer retires in their early 40s. So they still have a lot of runway. And so how does that experience then translate to the corporate world? What's the right fit? And it's for the talent teams and the recruitment teams at large organizations, understanding where veterans can really make an impact within the organization, I think is an important skill that companies have, that they bring on that expertise internally, or at least have access to it as well. Because the military does a nice job of facilitating and helping veterans through that transition period. They have a lot of training sessions, so companies can actually attend some of those training sessions on transition and talk about what are the roles that can be available for them when they exit the military. So actively engaging there. For the veterans coming into the business, I think there's a couple things that I would recommend, and you spoke to this. Oftentimes, veterans are seen as, hey, great logisticians, really good at managing logistics, inventory, tends to be more operationally focused. And I would say that the strategic planning and the strategic approach that military veterans bring to an organization can be truly invaluable, because the complexity of geopolitical issues, all the factors that they have to consider when putting together a strategic plan is critical. But many of the veterans that I've spoken to, when you meet with them, they focus on the what. They focus on what they achieved. Similar supply chain metrics that we're all familiar with, right? My suggestion to them is, don't focus on the what you achieved, focus on how you achieved it, because that'll be easier to translate to the talent and recruitment teams at a company, because they'll be able to see then the transition and utilizing a skill set on how you got something done, either through influence, leadership, or just working across teams to achieve a goal, and they'll be able to see that easily to apply that to the organization.
Okay. Okay. Thank
So
you.
it's the how versus the what, I think, would be my recommendation for
Mhm.
them to consider that in their elevator speech and their resume, etc.
Absolutely. I think there's in my career, I've had several former Army, Navy veterans, reserves, part of my organizations, and I see a lot of transferability. And yes, you're right. There's sometimes a little stereotype of the operational side, but there's a lot more based on their guiding principles that can add to an organization. So I definitely echo that. So let me, on this last section of our conversation, I want to pivot completely out of what we've been discussing and just talk about innovation, investment, future view, right? As you know, I've shifted
Passion for
my.
that.
Hmm?
You have a passion for that.
Yes. I shifted from operating supply chain to investing on them nowadays, right?
Yes.
So I come to see innovation, right or wrong, through three global mega trend lenses, right? And that's the way I see the world: automation and digitization, visibility and global trade, and resiliency and productivity. Those are the three. So from your perspective, if you had to pick one of them, which one is the one that will define the next decade supply chain transformation?
So I think it's automation and digitalization, right? The next evolution, leveraging technology, AI that's out there. And I tell you why. I think COVID accelerated the development of more resilient supply chains, uh, because if they did not invest in a more resilient supply chain, they frankly did not survive. And COVID accelerated that, and many companies learned a lot. And I wouldn't say they're done, because you're never done. You're continuously evolving and improving. But I think if you look at today, when I think about supply chain, some of the things we just talked about with visibility of inventory and democratizing that information, the opportunity is around automating, leveraging AI and agentic. I think with intelligent agents, if you will, leveraging that to build a more automated supply chain on some of those elements of supply chain that are very maybe operational, repeatable, and perhaps not necessarily value add today, but allowing that to free up the time of other individuals within the organization to really focus on greater value added activity, could be strategy, et cetera. So I do think the automation is really the opportunity for the future.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thanks for answering. I fully agree. Automation digitization is nowadays probably one that is at least getting a lot more attention than the other ones. So now there, regarding innovation, companies are realizing that, not all the companies, but most companies are realizing that internal innovation is not sufficient anymore, right? They Large enterprises, they need to expand their horizons beyond internal innovation and look at startups, at venture capitals, tech ecosystems to really stay ahead of the next wave of disruption, right? So in that regard, maybe the question is, from external innovation partnerships, what approach works better for corporations like the ones you work at, large corporations, regarding partnering with startups and collaborating with them? Which model have you seen or experienced that works better regarding external innovation?
Yeah, so I think there's probably a few that work best depending upon the organization. And I would say there's probably still a space for internal innovation at any company, but it's always difficult then to scale it and to evaluate that if you don't have the structure to support that within the organization. Some organizations do, some do not. So that's where the third party, the external, comes in to be able to more rapidly validate that and test that out in whether it's a lab environment, whether there's an incubator environment. I think the most successful ones are the ones that basically are able to understand the need state. What is the problem you're trying to solve? Go outside, evaluate a solution, and then quickly come back in to test that within the organization in some way, shape, or form, so you can really validate it. Too often, if you work in parallel and you don't integrate it into the organization, it gets too far along before it's really viable, and that's always difficult. So I think some hybrid, where there's some engagement from the company at the right time with the incubator or with the startup, and working in parallel, and at the right time transferring over into a model where you can really evaluate whether it's valid solution or not.
Let me do a follow up on that one, and this is slightly different of what
Yeah.
we talk on our prep call, but let's play pretend. You have you're the leader of a supply chain. You have $100 of capital expense available. Part of it you need to invest it to maintain or to really run the current operations, but part of it is what you need to invest to keep current and innovation. So without putting you in a hot spot, but how much you put for innovation? 5%, 10%, 15%? What's your experience in that regard?
Yeah, I'll give you my
Mm.
what I would do. The I think there needs to be a bucket of dollars for innovation. It's always a fine line. It maybe is perhaps a bit dynamic, basically on where your organization is at any given time. When you look at your relative, how contemporary are you as compared to the industry or where you want to be?
Right.
And
Right.
that will probably drive what percentage. But I would honestly say that it north of any minimum of 25% should be dedicated towards innovation, whether that's internal or external. And we know what happens when companies stop innovating, right? That's never a good model, and you get left behind. And that is probably more relevant today than it ever was, where if you're not innovating, we you know that there's a competitor down the street that is, and you can get left behind quickly in the current environment, right? That is just reality.
I appreciate you answering, though I put you on the hot spot there, but I
Yeah, that's
appreciate your
okay.
honesty. I appreciate your honesty and transparency on that. You're really an authentic guy. So Bob, we need to wrap this up. I could spend hours talking with you, but let me just do a couple final questions just to wrap up this
Sure.
conversation. So, and just to put it full circle, right? So what does Veteran Day means to you personally, Bob the person, not the executive, not the former military person? So, and how has your service continued to shape your leadership philosophy long after leaving uniform?
So, thank you for that. I think I'll start with what I said at the outset is my dad was a veteran. My grandfather was a veteran. My uncles were veterans. So the family has a deep history of veterans. And yeah, although I didn't serve active duty, I have a tremendous respect for veterans. I have many friends that were in active duty, served, and um, had very fruitful careers coming out of that. So, one, Veterans Day to me is about taking the time out and respecting and appreciating the service and commitment and sacrifice that they and their families made to serve the country. And it is them and their families. And it is a tremendous sacrifice when somebody is deployed and on the family. And that's something that I think if you're not familiar with that, you don't realize what a disruption, how disruptive that can be when somebody is deployed for an extended length of period. So I just have tremendous respect and appreciation for the veterans. I always want to do what we can to support veterans in any way we can. But so it means more for me to appreciate my family. And I always challenge myself to say, what else can I do to help veterans? Um, I served as the chair of the Veterans Employee Network at McDonald's, but never felt that was enough. So there's always more to do. So that's what it means to me.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate it. So, one last question, and this is a question that everybody sitting with me will be the last question that I will ask to everyone. Just trying to get a sense of what does keeping the momentum flow mean for each and every one of you in leadership and in life. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I love the title, by the way. So for me, it's a few things. It's um it's about one, continuously improving and never being satisfied. And that's something I learned from my dad, but also from the military is never be satisfied with where you're at. And it's okay to celebrate when you reach some goals, but what's next? So that there's a healthy bit of restlessness that you need to have to continue that momentum. That's one. Number two, innovation. How do you continue to innovate? And momentum, to innovate, you need that momentum to keep going, and vice versa. The two go hand in hand. And the other thing, when I think about having momentum, is a little bit of blocking and tackling and making sure that you have a good plan and contingency and have built in a resilient plan that's agile enough to adjust to all the changes because you do not want some of those, whether it's geopolitical issues, to derail your momentum. And so that foundation is so important to keep that momentum going. So when I think of the title, that's why I love it, because there's so many attributes of maintaining momentum. Some are traditional, foundational, and some are very future looking as well. And I think the two go hand in hand. So that's what it means to me.
Bob, I really, really appreciate you joining me. This was a great
Pleasure.
conversation. Thanks for your insights. So to everyone, that was Bob Stewart, former Chief Supply Chain Officer of McDonald's North America and a 15-year U.S. Navy Reserve veteran. On this Veterans Day, his story reminds us that the values of service, discipline, teamwork, and readiness are the same values driving innovation across global supply chains. As investors, operators, and leaders, we're driving the next wave of industrial and technological transformation, linking ideas, talent, and technology to create a smarter, more resilient supply chains for what's ahead. I'm Luis Solana, and this is the Momentum Flow. Thanks for listening, and until the next time, keep building the momentum flow.